Hey everybody, this is Isaiah, and welcome back to Magic System Monday. So last episode, we talked about the problem with a lot of writers ditching their main characters. But what if I told you it actually doesn't have to be this way?
It's possible. Unlikely.
There are ways that you can mitigate this. There are actually a number of ways that writers can write with multiple side characters while not having them all step on each other's toes or poach each other's success. There are a number of stories that get this right. And the way they get this right is establishing, initially, what kind of story this is going to be. How much stake are each of these characters going to have in the story? And that's going to be a defining factor in how a good writer writes their story. And we know this because if we look over to the West, we see a couple of examples that I want to bring up. Game of Thrones, A Song in Ice and Fire, but then we have something like Star Wars The Clone Wars. Now, what's so important about Song of Ice and Fire and Star Wars The Clone Wars? Well, Star Wars The Clone Wars is actually an anthology. And in anthologies, the story isn't based off of one person. Even though Star Wars has very iconic characters like Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they're in those stories. The stories are not about them. They share a limited portion of this story, even if they are very, very important to the world and the story itself. An anthology series, it's not about any one person, even though it can be. The spotlight is spread around. But Isaiah, didn't you say that was a bad thing? Well, no, it's a bad thing for writers who aren't prepared for it, because most writers don't build their stories that way.
Bombastic side eye. Criminal offensive side eye.
In an anthology, you know from the jump that you're spreading the investment out amongst multitudes of different characters. There's a strong burden there to write characters, events, scenes, etc., that while they can loosely attach, there's also incentive to make one-offs and things like that. For example, if you like one story arc in the Clone Wars,
have to do this.
You can't do it, can you? Eventually you'll have to do the right thing.
that doesn't mean you'll like the next one.
Get him up, let him get up, let him get up, let him get up. Fight back!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Right, which is a risk unto itself. But that's because they're so severed and divided from each other. The writers have to put effort into each individual story arc in person who may or may not show up again to make sure the investment is relevant. And it all increases the investment in the bigger picture, because Clone Wars is about the Clone Wars. It's one whole war. It's a story about this war that's being waged. And these are all just the little pieces of it, even if they come together, or have some continuation later down the line. Now that's very important. So all of these eggs are spread out into these individual baskets, and the writers take intentional and specific care to put eggs in each basket. In other words, the story is built in such a way that we're not actually taking eggs from one character to give them to another. We're not making a major opportunity cost in developing one character over another, because that's just how the story works. Song of Ice and Fire. Oh, excuse me as I scream internally because of my inability to speak. A Song of Ice and Fire is a tad bit different. It's one continuous story from start to finish, but it's a story that has so many loops and different subdivisions and subplots and everything, because it's about politics, in a sense. This is a very risky thing, but if you do that type of thing well, then you have to look at what this person is doing over here in their corner of the room and what that person is doing over there, and they're all intentionally built to come together in a bigger picture. The main problem with A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as a lot of other works of fiction that have a lot of moving parts or feature politics heavily, is there are a lot of different individual places where things can go wrong, because you have to spread the eggs around in multiple baskets. But like I said before, the story knows that, and the story intentionally puts forth story beats and schemes to actually facilitate that. And the best part of that is, there's no one who watches Game of Thrones, or very few people who watch Game of Thrones, for one character. It doesn't work that way. Unlike normal conventional stories where they have a small cast of main characters, stories like I said, like Clone Wars and A Song of Ice and Fire, what they do is establish a norm and a setting where simply liking one or two characters isn't enough. They put enough effort into each of their characters and their story beats and developments that even if you don't like all the characters, you will at least like a number of characters, so that even if one character is off screen, or bless their poor soul, that character dies, you don't lose all your investment. On the other hand, if you have a story with very limited main characters, say you have 3 main characters, maybe you like 1 or 2 of those characters more than the last character, right? What happens if your favorite character dies? It can be an occasion where you can get invested in other characters because of the plot development that produces, but if you don't like those characters enough, then you just lose interest in the story entirely. The thing where your investment resided has been completely removed. That doesn't happen in A Song of Ice and Fire, at least it shouldn't. Because even if one character died, for example, even if someone like Ahsoka Tano died, as important as she is to the story, we still would have had other things to be invested in that don't directly have anything to do with her, even if your investment would have taken a hit. And that's a big deal, because to my understanding, she's actually the most popular character in the Clone Wars to begin with. Meaning that if you play your cards right, literally the most interesting part of a series can disappear, and you can still retain a great deal of investment. Alright? You see where I'm getting at here. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. These 2 stories knew what kind of importance they wanted each individual character to have. They knew that they wanted to spread around their investment, and they built around that. Going back to all these other stories I just mentioned, they don't do that, because they don't fully realize it from the jump. And by the time they try to fix it, they just make things worse. Now, unfortunately, I must confess, this is something that not all writers fully come to understand and respect as much as you think or hope that they would. Now, this is not to say that writers writing with a more singular track story have to write their story in the same way as you would an anthology or a very broad story like the Game of Thrones. But this is rather just an extreme opposite side of a spectrum when it comes to the way that eggs are placed in these various baskets. Now, what if you are a writer that has mainly a limited group of main characters, but you also want to spread your investment around a little bit to more characters? Am I saying you can't do that? Oh goodness, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you have to be very, very careful about it. You have to take great care in the way you build the story. And for the love of goodness, just because side characters get development does not mean you have to take away from the main characters. You can build the story in a way that these characters are going at it together, or you shift it around, and for the love of goodness. The thing that makes this worst of all is not just when you do that, when you take away extra pieces of the story and dole them out to irrelevant characters, because there are stories that do that mostly fine. For example, like Overlord. Overlord has a lot of characters in it. Overlord is an anime. I think it's in season 4 now. It's actually not my favorite, but I know a lot of people who swear by it. It is an isekai, so be advised in that regard. It's an isekai where the main character is a villain, and he has this whole guild of creatures and NPCs, so to speak, that he controls. But there are a lot of characters outside of them, a lot of which die, some of them don't. But people are able to maintain investment in that story because of the gravity that is produced by these side and semi-irrelevant characters, that they give the actions that the main characters take more meaning and more context. And maybe I'll make an episode about that one day. This is Magic System Monday, not how to build a story Sunday, but you get the idea. What I do, on the other hand, is I have what I like to call the 80-20 rule. This doesn't have to be the 80-20 rule for you. It might be the 70-30 rule. It might be the 60-40 rule for you. But I know in the stories that I write what impact I want secondary and side characters to have, and I build the story around that. So I use this 80-20 rule. See, I have for a few years now, have been writing a series where the main character, as important as he is, one of his main goals is to focus on and build up other characters. That's kind of his job as a teacher, as a trainer, as a tutor. So that means that even if he is the main character and he's the most important character, that his importance resides in his ability to put effort and investment into other characters. That means I have to spread around the spotlight or the focus from time to time. So for this, I developed the 80-20 rule. 80% of the story is going to be from his perspective. And while not all of that will be him dealing with personal issues, maybe half of that will be him dealing with personal issues. So maybe 40% of the story is him dealing with his own personal issues. The other 40% of the time that we're focusing strictly on him is him paying attention to, taking care, learning about, working with other characters whoever's relevant that story arc or whatever team he's working with. And this is the part where I remind you all that just because one character is getting development does not mean you can't develop multiple people at the same time. Over the years, I've been slowly learning how to create situations and events that characters can all interact with and react to different degrees, even if they're not the main focus. If you master this, then you can actually develop any number of people at the same time without directly or strictly focusing on them. Acknowledging their presence and then giving them the opportunity to make remarks or comments or expressions every now and again in the situation is good. It also helps to fill out and give context to the world that the main character lives in, to know that he's not the only relevant person in any given situation, even if we strictly focus on him. And then the last 20% will actually be from the spotlight of those other characters. The spotlight will shift from him onto these other characters for 20% of the story. But I also have a rule that it cannot be done all at once. We cannot go through 60, 70, 80% of the story and then give a massive chunk of 1/5 of the story to somebody else. That's not going to happen. There are multiple characters that have to share that type of spotlight. They pass it around, and it cannot be done all at once. It has to be done in chunks and portions, which is another thing these writers have difficulty with, because once the side characters start showing up, they don't stop showing up. They show up for massive amounts of time and take up all the screen time. Don't be that guy, and don't do that. In any case, that's all I have for today. This is Isaiah from Magic System Monday, and I'll see you guys later.